Let us try to understand different types of joints in our skeletal system. So based on the structure, we have three categories of joint: the fibrous joint, the cartilaginous joint, and the synovial joint. The classical example of the fibrous joint is the joint between the flat bones of the skull. The classical example of the cartilaginous joint is the joint between the vertebra of the vertebral columns. The other example of the cartilaginous joint is the joint between the left and the right pubis of the pelvic girdle. The example of the synovial joint is the knee joint between the femur and the tibia. Since the synovial joint is the most abundant joint in the human skeletal system, and it has the importance because it provides movement and the flexibility to the skeletal system. So let us further classify this synovial joint. So synovial joint can be classified based on their function and the movement into 6 different categories. The first one is the ball and socket joint, then we have the saddle joint, then we have the ellipsoidal joint, then we have the hinge joint, then we have the pivot joint, and lastly we have the flat joint. So let us understand where these joints found in the skeletal system. So the classical example of the ball and socket joint is the hip joint and the shoulder joint in the skeletal system. The example of the saddle joint is the joint between the carpals and the metacarpals, or tarsals and the metatarsals. The example of the ellipsoidal joint is the joint between the metacarpals and the phalanges, or metatarsals and the phalanges. The example of the hinge joint is the elbow joint and the knee joint. The example of the pivot joint is the joint between the C1 and C2 cervical vertebra that helps the rotational movement of the head. The example for the flat joint is the joint between the tarsals or the carpals.